I never imagined a piece of paper could change everything between us. That morning, I walked into the room where our father had kept his will, hoping for clarity, hoping for fairness. Instead, I found silence. My sister sat across from me, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands, her eyes guarded. She wouldn't look at me, she wouldn't speak. And in that moment, I realized how fragile family could be, how easily love could turn into resentment, and how trust could slip through your fingers before you even noticed. This isn't right, I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm, steady, even though my heart was racing. She shook her head slowly, almost imperceptibly. You'll understand when you see it, she said, her tone flat, emotionless, yet heavy with unspoken meaning. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. I felt a strange mixture of fear, hurt, and disbelief. All my life, my sister and I had shared secrets, laughter, and the bond of growing up in the same home. And yet now, in a single moment, that bond felt tenuous, as if decades of connection could unravel with a few silent gestures and a refusal to share what was rightfully ours. I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. I reminded myself of who I was, her sister, the one who had stood by her through every argument, every heartbreak, every small victory. And still, a cold weight settled in my chest, the realization that the love I had taken for granted could now be measured in paper, signatures, and lines drawn in ink. And that's when I understood. This day was no longer about inheritance. It was about everything we had lost along the way: trust, understanding, and the quiet promise that family would always stand together, no matter what. To understand that moment, I have to go back to the years before the will, before the tension, to the life we shared as sisters. We grew up in a small, quiet town, the kind where everyone knew each other's business, and the streets were lined with familiar faces. Our father was a quiet man, stern but fair, with a soft spot for the two girls who had grown under his roof. He worked hard to provide for us, and our mother, though gone long before, had left a legacy of love that we carried in our hearts. I remember my sister as a little girl, bright, mischievous, and fiercely independent. Even then, she had a streak of stubbornness, a determination to do things her way. I was quieter, more cautious, the one who followed rules and sought guidance. Yet, somehow, we balanced each other. We played together, argued fiercely, and shared secrets in hushed whispers late at night. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We faced challenges: the sudden illness of our mother, the long hours our father spent at work, the struggles of adolescence, but we faced them together. There was laughter, too, a lot of laughter, and small victories that made our bond feel unbreakable. As we grew older, our paths began to diverge. I pursued a career that kept me close to home, always mindful of our father's expectations. My sister, ever adventurous, sought experiences beyond our town, traveling, meeting people, chasing dreams that sometimes seemed reckless to me. We stayed close, but the differences became more pronounced. Arguments, once fleeting, began to leave marks. Small disagreements turned into long silences. Yet even in our distance, I never imagined a day would come when family could be torn apart over what should have united us. When our father fell ill, the first cracks began to show. I took on responsibilities quietly, helping with his care, managing finances, making sure our home ran smoothly. My sister visited less often, caught in the whirlwind of her own life. I never blamed her, not entirely, but each missed visit, each call left unanswered, planted seeds of frustration in my heart, subtle at first, but persistent. And then came the day he called us both to his study. The air felt heavy, saturated with unspoken truths. He handed us an envelope, thick and weighty, his hands trembling slightly. "This is my will," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "I trust you both to honor it fairly, with honesty and respect." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me. My sister smiled faintly, but I noticed something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation, of doubt, of calculation. I brushed it aside, thinking perhaps I was reading too much into it. After all, we had grown up together. We knew each other. We trusted each other. But trust is fragile, and inheritance has a way of revealing cracks that were always there, even if they were hidden under love, laughter, and years of shared history. In the days that followed, tension grew quietly, almost imperceptibly. We discussed the will in polite tones, careful not to upset our father. Yet each conversation felt like a test, each suggestion met with careful scrutiny. I tried to remind myself that this wasn't about money. It was about respect, fairness, family. But deep down, I feared that even fairness could be subjective, that love could be measured in ways far too small to see. I watched my sister closely, noticing the way she lingered on certain clauses, the way her gaze shifted whenever the topic arose. I wanted to confront her, to ask her if she understood what this meant, not just legally, but emotionally. But something stopped me. Something about the way our father had looked at us, so full of hope and trust, reminded me that confrontation could fracture us permanently. Days turned into weeks. Small signs began to emerge: missing documents, hushed conversations, sudden disappearances of papers I had thought were settled. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself it was nerves, that inheritance matters were stressful. But the unease in my heart grew heavier. Something was shifting. Something I hadn't anticipated was quietly and inexorably altering the bond we had cherished since childhood. I remember the night before the final reading. I sat alone in my room, looking at photographs of us as children playing in the garden, laughing on rainy afternoons, sharing secrets on a summer porch. I traced our faces with my fingers, remembering the love, the trust, the unspoken promises we had made, and I felt a pang of fear. What if this love, this trust, could be undone by the simple act of division, of paper, of choice? The next morning would change everything. The day we were meant to stand together, honoring our father's wishes, became the day I realized just how fragile family can be, how easily love can be tested, and how even lifelong bonds can be challenged by pride, greed, and fear. After our father passed, the house felt different, empty in a way that wasn't just about his absence. It was about the quiet tension that had settled between us. I tried to focus on small tasks: cleaning rooms, organizing papers, making sure the home felt like a place where memories could live, not decay. Yet every glance at my sister reminded me of the envelope she held tightly, the will that had sparked a quiet, growing distance between us. At first, I tried to reach her gently. "Can we sit together and go through this?" I asked one afternoon, my voice soft, careful. She shook her head, her lips pressed tightly. "Not now, later," she said, and retreated to the study, closing the door behind her. The words weren't harsh, but the message was clear. She wanted control, she wanted distance, and in that simple act, a subtle strain began to take root. A tension that wasn't about anger yet, but about fear, misunderstanding, and the fragile, invisible threads of sibling trust beginning to fray. I spent the next few days pacing the living room, looking at photographs, remembering the shared childhood, the secrets whispered in the dark, the laughter that had once filled every corner of the house. And yet, now, those memories felt like fragile glass, easily shattered by unspoken resentment, by decisions made silently behind closed doors. When I tried again, she simply avoided me, busying herself with the papers and letters that surrounded the will. I watched her from a distance, feeling a mix of sorrow and confusion. It was difficult to reconcile the sister I knew, the one I had laughed with, cried with, grown up with the quiet, guarded woman who now seemed almost like a stranger. The days dragged on. Family, friends began to ask questions, noticing the unease. "Are you both okay?" they would ask softly. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, a storm was brewing. I understood now that inheritance wasn't just about dividing assets. It was about choices, about priorities, about the power to decide who mattered most in moments of trust. And that power, I realized with a sinking heart, was being wielded in a way that left me feeling invisible. Even small conversations became minefields. "Do you think we should split the property evenly?" I asked one evening, trying to sound casual, careful not to accuse or demand. She looked up from the documents, eyes narrowing slightly. "I think some things need to be considered carefully," she said, and went back to her papers. Her words were neutral, yet every syllable felt like a wall being built between us. I wanted to reach across that wall, to remind her that family wasn't just about fairness in paper. It was about love, respect, and shared history. But every attempt was met with silence, with polite avoidance, with a quiet distance that weighed heavier than any words could express. As the weeks passed, the tension in our household began to grow, though never in a way that could be called loud or dramatic. There were no raised voices, no slamming doors, no sharp words exchanged across the table. Instead, it was subtler, more insidious, a quiet strain that threaded itself through our days and seemed to settle in every glance, every gesture, and every unspoken thought. It was harder to confront because it existed in moments too small to fight over, yet too persistent to ignore. It was in the way my sister would skim over my suggestions, nodding as if she had heard me, but immediately moving on without acknowledgement. It was in the way she would carefully check documents, reviewing them multiple times before allowing me a glance, as though my presence required filtering. It was in the way her gaze seemed to measure me, not with outright hostility, not with disdain, but with a cautious, almost clinical calculation that left no room for warmth or shared trust. I tried to remind myself to be patient, to give her the space she clearly felt she needed. I told myself that maybe she was overwhelmed by responsibility, that she only wanted to protect everyone from unnecessary arguments, that she believed carrying the weight herself would somehow shield us from hurt. But patience has its limits, especially when the love you feel is tested in quiet, subtle ways that gnaw at the heart every day, each day. Small moments accumulated, tiny incidents that on their own seemed trivial but together formed a heavy pattern. A document withheld, a question answered vaguely, a casual remark that carried the shadow of judgment. The envelope containing Dad's will, once a simple legal document, had transformed into something far heavier, a symbol of trust, loyalty, and the unspoken grievances that stretched back decades. I could feel it pressing on my chest, a reminder of how fragile the bonds we take for granted could become when communication falters. I remember one evening, the house bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, finding her again in the study. She was hunched over the table, papers spread around her like a protective wall. Her eyes darted across the pages, focused, precise, yet closed to the emotional weight that hung between us. I hesitated at the door, then stepped inside, choosing my words carefully, hoping to spark conversation without provoking confrontation. "Do you think it's fair for Dad to leave the property this way?" I asked gently, the words soft but carrying a tremor of the anxiety I felt. She looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing, and for a brief moment I wondered if she had been startled more by my presence than by the question itself. "Fairness is subjective," she replied, her voice flat, almost rehearsed. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." Her words cut deeper than any argument could. There was a cold precision in them that carried a quiet judgment, a sense that decisions had been made with deliberation, without input from me, without room for discussion. "Doing what needs to be done, for whom?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, betraying the mixture of sadness and confusion I could not contain. "For the family," she said, almost defensively, returning to her work as if nothing had happened. But her tone suggested something entirely different. I understood then that this was not about fairness or efficiency. This was about control, about asserting authority, about making decisions alone, and about creating a space in which I felt excluded. I felt a pang of sadness that had little to do with money or property. It was the ache of distance, the loss of connection, the realization that someone I loved and trusted was closing herself off from me. A chasm had formed between us, invisible yet wide, and I had no immediate bridge to cross it. We tried to involve other relatives, seeking mediation, seeking someone who could act as a neutral voice to smooth over the tension that had begun to infiltrate our days. We hoped that a familiar presence, someone who understood the dynamics of our family, could help reestablish communication. But each conversation, no matter how gentle, only revealed how deeply entrenched the divide had become. Casual questions from relatives, meant in innocence, often ignited subtle arguments or sparked brief moments of tension. Debates arose over fairness, over the importance of certain priorities, over what our father had truly intended, and always, without fail, my sister maintained a careful distance, guarding her decisions as though they were hers alone. At night, I would sit alone in my room, thinking back to our childhood. I remembered the long summer afternoons spent under the old oak tree, whispering secrets and sharing dreams. I remembered how we imagined futures in which we would always support one another, always laugh together, always defend each other against the world. Those memories, once vivid, now seemed fragile, almost impossible, like delicate glass perched precariously on the edge of a shelf. I asked myself repeatedly how it had come to this. How had our love and shared history been overshadowed by paper, signatures, and the quiet assertion of control? One evening, as I returned to the study, I found a note tucked into one of the folders. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. "Please respect my decisions. I know what I am doing." There was no warmth in the words, no explanation, no invitation to share or understand, just control. My chest tightened. One loved my sister deeply, with a love that had been formed over a lifetime of shared moments, shared secrets, and shared grief. And yet, this message made it clear that the bond we had once taken for granted was fragile now, easily tested, threatened by pride, misunderstanding, and fear. In the quiet hours of that night, lying awake in the stillness, I realized something painful. The conflict was never really about inheritance. It was about trust, about recognition, about the unspoken promise that family should stand together, support each other, and honor shared history. That promise now felt broken, delicate as glass in my hands, ready to shatter with the slightest misstep. I knew, even then, that the coming days would not be easy. Conversations would be cautious, words measured, emotions restrained. Every interaction carried the potential to open old wounds or, hopefully, to begin the slow process of healing. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I held on to a fragile hope that love, even when tested by silence, stubbornness, and pride, could survive. That reconciliation might still be possible if hearts remained open and courage outweighed the desire to protect oneself at all costs. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog. I noticed the subtle ways tension seeped into our lives. She would answer questions with careful brevity, her gaze occasionally sharp but often distant. I noticed the way she folded her hands tightly when I entered the room, the way her voice became clipped when discussing certain topics, the way she seemed to create invisible barriers between us, not out of malice, but out of fear, control, or habit. Every interaction was a careful dance, a measured negotiation between honesty and caution, between love and apprehension. And yet, within these tense moments, there were flashes of the sister I had always known, a soft glance in passing, a faint smile when we shared a joke from our childhood, a willingness to pause and listen for a few seconds longer than before. Those small glimpses reminded me that our bond was not entirely broken, that despite the subtle walls she had constructed, there remained a thread of connection, fragile but unbroken, that could be nurtured, even if slowly. I also began to reflect on my own role in the unfolding tension. Perhaps I had misjudged her motives. Perhaps I had allowed my own insecurities to amplify the distance. Perhaps my own expectations of immediate reconciliation had blinded me to the fear and vulnerability she carried. I realized that love requires patience, patience that stretches beyond the immediate desire for resolution and demands understanding of the other's struggles, limitations, and fears. It was in these quiet reflections, often alone at night, that I understood something crucial. The envelope with the will had become more than a document of inheritance. It had become a measure of trust, a test of patience, a silent reflection of our willingness to bridge the gap that fear and pride had created. And in that understanding, I found a strange sense of clarity. The turning point, I sensed, was not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet, profound realization that both of us needed each other, that neither of us could navigate the emotional weight of this alone, and that the love we had nurtured over decades still had the power to survive. It would not be easy, and it would not be immediate, but I felt in my heart that the moment of truth, when the silence would be broken and honesty would finally be spoken, was approaching. Little did I know, the day when the quiet strain would erupt into revelation, the day when unspoken truths and long-buried feelings would demand to be heard, was closer than I had imagined. And when that day came, nothing would ever feel the same again. The fragile tension, the delicate walls, and the unspoken measures of control would either crumble under honesty or demand that we confront the choices we had made, together, as siblings, as family, as people who loved and had been hurt in equal measure. Even in the uncertainty of those weeks, a tiny ember of hope remained. Hope that the love that had always been our foundation could withstand the strain. Hope that trust, once frayed, could be gently mended through patience, honesty, and courage. Hope that, eventually, the silent tension would give way to the warmth of connection, the recognition of shared history, and the quiet, enduring strength of family. And so, I waited, day by day, quietly observing, reflecting, and hoping, aware that the quiet escalation, though subtle, had brought us to the precipice of change. I just did not yet know how profound that change would be, or how deeply it would touch both our hearts. The morning of the meeting arrived quietly. Though my heart felt heavy with anticipation, I knew that today we would confront the tension that had been simmering for weeks, the unspoken conflict that had grown between my sister and me. The envelope with the will sat on the table, folded and sealed, a symbol of everything that had gone, unspoken, of trust, of love, of long-standing familial bonds that now felt fragile. I entered the study where she waited, her eyes focused on the papers, her fingers lightly tapping against the table. She did not look up immediately. "I thought we should go through this," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm, even gentle. She exhaled slowly, and finally met my gaze. "I suppose we should," she said, her voice tight, controlled. We sat across from each other, the silence stretching long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. The house felt different, charged with the weight of emotions that had been kept hidden, carefully folded away like the corners of the will. I tried to recall the sister I had known, the one I had laughed with, whispered secrets to, trusted completely, but the woman before me was cautious, measured, protective of every word, every gesture. I reached out slightly, trying to bridge the space. "I just want to understand," I said quietly. "I want to know why this has been so difficult for us both." Her hands tightened around a pen, and she looked away. "I'm only trying to do what's best," she replied. "For everyone." I didn't want conflict, but I thought I could manage it on my own. There it was, the confession hidden in neutral words. She was trying, yes, but in trying alone, she had created distance, a barrier neither of us had anticipated. I felt a mix of sorrow and understanding, realizing that sometimes, even the ones we love most act out of fear and pride rather than malice. I leaned forward slightly. "You didn't mean to hurt me, did you?" Her gaze met mine for a fleeting moment, vulnerable and raw. I didn't think," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting us all. I didn't see how much it would divide us." And in that moment, I felt the first crack of the turning point, the fragile recognition that the conflict was not born out of hate, but out of fear and misunderstanding. The rising tension of weeks, the silent strain that had haunted us both, was beginning to show its true face. A longing for connection, buried under pride and uncertainty. We began to open the documents slowly, cautiously, each signature and note a thread weaving between our emotions. And yet, the real conversation, the one about our relationship, about the years of shared life and the trust that had been tested, lingered just beneath the surface, waiting to be spoken. As we progressed through the will, the tension grew, not as a storm of anger or harsh words, but as a quiet, heavy awareness of what had been lost between us over the past weeks. It was a weight that neither of us had spoken aloud, yet it hovered constantly in the spaces between sentences, in the pauses that stretched longer than they should, in the glances that lingered a fraction too long. Every decision recorded on paper, every allocation of property, every small legal note reflected more than financial outcomes. They reflected the power to include or exclude, to acknowledge or ignore the presence of the person who had once been closest to you. I felt a pang in my chest each time I realized my sister had made a decision without consulting me, and deep down, I knew she felt it, too, the silent weight of responsibility, the judgment she passed on herself for choices she had made in isolation. I had tried for weeks to maintain calm, to remind myself that she had only acted out of love for the family, that perhaps she had thought she was sparing us conflict. Yet even as I tried to reason with myself, each skipped conversation, each small exclusion, each paper she signed without me, added to the quiet, gnawing ache. The emotional distance grew like a slow tide, encroaching on the bond that had been unshakable for decades. I remembered our childhood, sitting side by side under the big oak tree in our backyard, sharing secrets and dreams, imagining futures we would walk into together. And now, those memories felt almost fragile, like they could crumble at the slightest disturbance. Finally, I could not hold back any longer, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, the soft light of the afternoon filtering through the blinds. I took a deep breath and asked the question that had been pressing against my heart for weeks. "Why didn't you include me earlier?" I asked, my voice calm but edged with a quiet, aching pain. "Why did you take this on alone, when we could have faced it together?" Her hands paused over the documents she was reviewing. For a moment, she did not look up. Then slowly, her gaze met mine, and for the first time I saw something I had not seen in weeks. Vulnerability, real vulnerability, not masked by composure or defensiveness. "I was scared," she admitted softly, almost in a whisper. "I was afraid of conflict. I thought if I handled it myself, no one would get hurt. But I see now, I only pushed you away." Her words hung in the room, delicate as glass, yet heavy with meaning. I felt a lump form in my throat. The emotional breaking point had arrived, not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with quiet, raw honesty. This moment, I realized, could either destroy the bond we had nurtured for a lifetime or allow it to be rebuilt, piece by piece, under the weight of empathy, truth, and shared vulnerability. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. The warmth of her palm was familiar, comforting, and grounding. "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We both made mistakes, but the important thing is that we're here now, facing it together." Tears welled in her eyes, and I felt my own spill over, not as a dramatic outburst but as a quiet, honest release of the tension that had gripped us both. The invisible wall that had separated us for weeks seemed to tremble, then shift, as though beginning to crumble under the weight of honesty. In that moment, the legal documents, the signed papers, and the property allocations faded into the background. What mattered most was the bond that had been strained but not broken, the love that remained beneath the surface, waiting for acknowledgement and care. We sat together in silence, letting the reality of our conversation settle like a soft blanket around us. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it was profound. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tentative but growing sense of relief. The conflict that had simmered quietly between us, rooted not in malice but in fear, pride, and miscommunication, was finally being acknowledged. This moment was not about winning or losing. It was about reconnecting, understanding, and reclaiming the intimacy of siblinghood that had always been the foundation of our relationship. "I missed this," she said softly, her voice trembling as it had when we were children, afraid to speak but longing to be understood. "I didn't want to, but I missed having you here, as a part of this." "I missed you too," I replied, holding her gaze, letting the truth of those words settle between us. "More than you know." That exchange marked a turning point, not in legal terms, not in the way of the paper documents, but in the emotional realm. The inner landscape of our connection, the weeks of quiet distance, of subtle judgment, and withheld communication, were confronted and transformed by honesty, empathy, and acknowledgement. The road ahead would not be free of tension, of course. Patience would still be required. Conversation, understanding, and trust would need continual nurturing. But we had taken the first, crucial step toward rebuilding what had been strained. Over the following hours, we continued to talk, slowly and deliberately. Not every word was perfect. There were hesitations, long pauses, and moments where we both struggled to articulate feelings that had been buried for too long. Yet, even these pauses felt meaningful. They allowed space for reflection, for feeling, for acknowledging the weight of the situation without fear or defensiveness. "I know I acted selfishly," she admitted later, as we reviewed one of the documents together. "I thought I was protecting everyone, but I realize I only protected myself from feeling conflict, from feeling judged. I didn't think about what it meant for you." I shook my head gently. "No, I understand," I said. "We both acted out of fear. I think that's human. But now, we can do this together. That's what matters." As we spoke, the subtle lines of strain in her expression began to soften. Her shoulders, once tense, relaxed. Her gaze, once measured and careful, now lingered with warmth and openness. I felt the same shift within myself, a release of the anxiety that had made even simple interactions feel heavy. For the first time in weeks, I felt a cautious but real sense of relief. We began to work together through the will, not as adversaries, not as cautious negotiators wary of each other, but as siblings rediscovering trust and connection. Every small decision became an opportunity for collaboration. Every shared glance a reaffirmation that we were on the same side, striving toward a shared understanding. The documents themselves, once symbols of division, became tools for rebuilding trust and communication. As the evening deepened, the room quieted, and the soft golden light of sunset spilled across the table. I reflected on how far we had come in just a few hours. The confrontation, though uncomfortable and emotional, had been transformative. It had stripped away pretenses, fears, and defenses, leaving only the raw, human truth. We had loved each other deeply, had made mistakes, had been hurt, and yet we had survived. And surviving, I realized, was not the end. It was the beginning of a conscious effort to rebuild, to nurture, and to honor our bond. We spoke late into the night, often in whispers, careful not to disturb the fragile calm we were creating. We shared stories of our childhood, laughing softly at forgotten anecdotes, marveling at the way time had shaped us, and acknowledging the small regrets that lingered from past misunderstandings. Each revelation, each quiet confession, acted like a thread, weaving a tapestry of renewed connection. one that felt stronger because it had been tested at one point. She paused and looked at me, her eyes glistening. "I didn't realize how much I needed you here," she said. "I thought handling it alone would make things easier, but it just made everything feel emptier." I nodded, understanding completely. "I know," I said softly. "Sometimes we think distance protects us, but it doesn't. Presence, even when it's hard, is what truly matters. And now, we're here. That's what counts." We spent the next hours not just reviewing the will, but also revisiting shared memories, discussing how we would approach family decisions together moving forward. Each conversation strengthened the bridge between us, a bridge built not on obligation, but on choice, the deliberate choice to trust, to include, and to love. By the time night fully settled, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of paper. The tension that had dominated our lives for weeks had been replaced, slowly and gently, by understanding, empathy, and a sense of shared purpose. The confrontation had not erased the past, nor did it promise a conflict-free future, but it had created a foundation from which we could continue, deliberately, carefully, and with hearts open to each other. And in the stillness, I realized something I had known deep down but had not fully acknowledged until now. The papers, the property, the legalities, they were never truly the heart of the conflict. The heart of the conflict had always been our bond, our shared history, the unspoken longing to be understood and included. Now, for the first time in weeks, that bond felt alive again. It felt real, possible, and ready to carry us forward, even through the challenges that lay ahead. The confrontation had been uncomfortable, emotional, and robust. It had been necessary. It had been the turning point, not because it resolved every disagreement, but because it cleared the path for honesty, empathy, and reconnection. It marked the first real step toward reconciliation, toward rebuilding trust, and toward honoring the love that had always existed between us, even when it had been overshadowed by fear and misunderstanding. As we finally closed the documents for the night and left the table, I felt a quiet, unshakable sense of hope. The road ahead would still have bumps, moments of tension, and times when patience would be tested. But the first step, confronting our feelings, acknowledging our mistakes, and embracing vulnerability had been taken. And in that step, I found a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes not from perfection, but from the deliberate act of choosing love, trust, and presence above all else. Later that evening, after we had carefully returned the papers to their envelope, the weight of the day seemed to settle around us like a soft, still fog. We moved to the living room, each of us carrying the lingering tension from hours of careful navigation through legalities, family expectations, and our own unspoken fears. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the room was bathed in a soft, golden glow, the kind of light that makes even ordinary spaces feel sacred, quiet, almost reverent. Outside, the world had begun to dim, the trees casting long, gentle shadows across the lawn, and it felt, in that moment, as if time itself had paused. The air was heavy with stillness, a pause before something new could begin. She sat on the couch, her hands resting lightly on her lap. The stiffness that had defined her posture for weeks had softened. Her eyes, which once seemed guarded and measuring, were now open, vulnerable, and tentative. There was a quiet tension still lingering in her shoulders, but it carried a new weight, one of possibility rather than resistance. I took a seat across from her, close enough to bridge the distance, but giving her the space she might still need. "I don't want us to carry this tension any longer," she said softly, her voice low and hesitant, but steady enough to carry the weight of meaning. I want to start again, if you'll let me." Her words hung in the room like a fragile bridge across the gap that had separated us. I felt warmth flood my chest, a mix of relief, hope, and the quiet thrill of seeing the sister I had feared lost returning, inch by inch, into my life. "There's nothing I want more," I replied, my voice soft but unwavering. "We can start now. No more silence, no more distance." For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. No words, no gestures, just the recognition of shared history, shared love, and the mutual acknowledgement of mistakes, fears, and vulnerabilities. And in that quiet, suspended space, a transformation occurred. The sister I had feared lost to pride and stubbornness was here again, fully present, tentative, yet sincere. The bond that had been stretched thin by weeks of subtle tension, by decisions made alone and unspoken grievances, began to regain its elasticity, pliable and forgiving, slowly bending back toward connection. We didn't rush. There was no sudden, dramatic reconciliation. No grand speeches of apology or declarations of undying love. It didn't need to be loud or theatrical. Perfection had never been the goal. Understanding, patience, and the willingness to meet each other halfway, that was what mattered. It had always mattered, even when we had forgotten. In the haze of pride and frustration, we began to talk, at first, tentatively, about memories we had once shared so freely, stories from childhood, tales of mischief, moments of quiet triumph, the little victories and failures that had shaped who we were. Each memory recalled was like laying another brick in a foundation that had wavered but never truly crumbled. "Do you remember the treehouse Dad built for us?" I asked, smiling despite the lump in my throat. She chuckled, a soft, warm sound that seemed to fill the room. "How could I forget? You were so afraid of heights, but you climbed anyway, just to make him proud." "I wasn't afraid," I said with a grin, though my voice betrayed the truth. "I just didn't want to let him down." She laughed, lightly, softly, the kind of laughter that seemed to wash away the remnants of tension lingering in the air. "You always worried about letting people down," she said. "Even now, it seems. I guess some things never change," I said, smiling through the quiet ache that the memory brought. We lingered on those stories, letting ourselves be transported to simpler times, when the world was smaller, when love seemed unquestioned and unconditional. There was a tenderness in our exchange, a recognition that despite the weeks of distance, despite the conflict over the will and the subtle hurts that had accumulated, we still knew each other deeply. As the conversation shifted, we began to share the more recent memories, the small disagreements, the quiet frustrations, the moments when we had each felt isolated or misunderstood. I listened as she spoke, really listened, not just to the words but to the pauses, the sighs, the unspoken feelings that came with each sentence. And she listened to me, her eyes steady, her presence open, her vulnerability a mirror of my own. "I was scared," she admitted, softly, after a pause. "Scared of losing you, of the fight getting worse, of everything crumbling. I thought if I handled it alone, I could protect us, but I see now I was only pushing you away." Her confession settled over me, heavy yet liberating. I reached across the space between us and took her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers and the warmth of her skin. "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We both made mistakes. The important thing is that we're here now, together." Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering in the fading light, and mine followed, not in sorrow alone, but in the relief of being seen, acknowledged, and accepted. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way movies make reconciliation look, but it was profound. The invisible wall that had grown between us over days and weeks of quiet strain began to crumble, piece by piece, under the weight of honesty, empathy, and shared pain. We sat there, side by side, not needing to fill the silence with words, letting the quiet embrace us. It was a different kind of communication, one that didn't rely on arguments, just presence. It was a conversation in which the language of care, of shared history, of love carried more weight than the spoken word. "I missed this," she said finally, her voice trembling, almost a whisper. "I didn't want to, but I missed having you here, as a part of this life, this family." "I missed you too," I replied, holding her gaze, letting my own vulnerability show. "More than you know." The evening stretched on. We moved from memories to plans for the future, small plans, really, mundane things like arranging furniture, deciding on dinner menus, or planning a visit to our parents' old home. But even these simple, ordinary decisions carried a new meaning. They were symbols of inclusion, gestures that signaled our renewed trust and the rebuilding of our bond. We laughed quietly, overshared, recollections of childhood pranks, like the time we had tried to bake a cake together and ended up covering the kitchen in flour. We recalled family vacations, moments of awkward teenage rebellion, and the little victories we had celebrated in private. Even as the past was acknowledged, we chose not to dwell on grudges or perceived slights. Instead, we focused on understanding, on listening, and on reconnecting. Before long, the room grew darker, the soft glow of the sunset fading into twilight. Yet there was a warmth in the space between us that was brighter than any light outside. Before leaving that evening, she reached out and hugged me tightly. I could feel the steady beat of her heart against mine, the pressure of her hands, the sincerity in her embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled against my shoulder, "for not giving up on me, on us." I held her close, letting tears slip silently down my cheeks. "Thank you too," I whispered back, "for letting me in." Finally, the reconciliation was not instantaneous, not complete, and certainly not perfect. There were no grand gestures, no public declarations, no dramatic demonstrations of affection. It was quiet, intimate, and profoundly human, and that, I realized, was what made it lasting. It was a reconciliation built on presence, honesty, and courage rather than ceremony or spectacle. From that night onward, the silent strain that had haunted our days began to soften. Conversations that had once been cautious, measured, or weighted with unspoken tension became easier. Laughter, long absent from our shared spaces, began to return, small and tentative at first, growing in confidence with each shared joke or memory. The subtle warmth of trust, once fragile and tentative, began to bloom again, filling the spaces where fear and pride had once resided. Even the will, which had been the focal point of so much tension, now became a symbol not of division, but of reconciliation. Together, we reviewed it calmly, carefully, considering each decision, listening to each other's perspectives, and acknowledging feelings that had once been dismissed or overlooked. What had been a source of silent strain now became a testament to our growth and the rebuilding of trust. Through the experience, I learned that reconciliation is rarely instant, and forgiveness is never simple. True healing requires patience, reflection, and the willingness to be vulnerable. Love, I realized, is not diminished by disagreements or misunderstandings. It can withstand tension, evolve, and even emerge stronger after periods of strain. That night, as I finally left the living room, I looked back at her sitting there, quiet, yet present, and I felt a deep, calm satisfaction. It wasn't about winning arguments, asserting rights, or even dividing inheritance fairly. It was about recognizing the enduring bond of family, the value of shared history, and the power of patience, empathy, and courage to overcome weeks of silent, simmering conflict. The turning point had been reached not in the legal papers, not in the decisions or outcomes, but in our hearts. It was in the shared acknowledgement of mistakes, the courage to be honest, and the willingness to rebuild together. It was in the quiet, profound realization that love can endure, even when strained, and that reconciliation, though slow and tentative, can be real, lasting, and transformative. And as I walked through the darkened hallway to my room that night, I carried with me a profound sense of hope and gratitude. Hope that our bond, though tested, would continue to grow. Gratitude for the courage we had both shown in confronting our fears and opening our hearts. And the quiet knowledge that even after tension, even after misunderstanding, even after weeks of unspoken strain, family can heal, love can endure, and the ties that bind us can emerge stronger than before. In the days following our emotional confrontation, I began to notice small shifts in the way we related to each other. The heaviness that had dominated our interactions, the quiet tension, the unspoken judgments, the hesitancy to include one another, began to loosen, almost imperceptibly at first. It was as if the air in our home had gradually changed, carrying a lighter, more hopeful tone that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. We were still careful, still tentative, but there was warmth returning, a subtle acknowledgement that the bridge we had feared broken was slowly being rebuilt. At first, the changes were minor, almost fragile. She would ask my opinion on small, everyday things, the placement of a lamp in the living room, the pattern of a tablecloth, which dish to prepare for a casual meal, and I realized that it wasn't about control or authority. It was about recognition, about being included in the life we had shared for so long. Each time she asked for my input, it felt like a quiet olive branch, a gentle invitation to return to the connection we had always had, and I accepted those invitations with a sense of relief and gratitude, recognizing that the work of rebuilding trust is a slow, delicate process. One afternoon, the sunlight streamed softly through the kitchen window, casting warm, golden light across the table. She had handed me a stack of old photographs, faded and worn around the edges, a collection of moments we had shared long ago. Sitting together, sorting through them, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of closeness that was tentative yet comforting. "Do you remember this one?" she asked, holding up a photograph of us covered in flour, from a baking experiment gone hilariously wrong. My lips curved into a smile, and a soft laugh escaped me. "How could I forget?" I replied, my voice warm and calm. "You insisted on stirring the batter all by yourself and ended up dropping half of it on the floor." Her laughter, light and unguarded, filled the quiet room. It was a sound that reminded me of the sister I had grown up with, the one who had once clung to me for comfort, who had shared secrets, dreams, and fears. I was trying to be independent, she admitted, a touch of vulnerability in her tone. I didn't mean to make a mess, just like I didn't mean to push you away now. Her words struck me deeply. I understood, in that moment, that reconciliation isn't about pretending the past never happened. It isn't about erasing pain or denying hurt. It is about acknowledging it, honoring it, and choosing to move forward together. Love, I realized, is a conscious choice, renewed each day through presence, understanding, and patience. The next few days unfolded slowly, intentionally. Our home began to feel lighter, filled with the soft sounds of shared life. We spoke more freely, not about the will or the arguments, but about ordinary things, recipes we wanted to try. Memories of our childhood home, small observations about the weather or the neighborhood. Even mundane tasks became opportunities for connection. Folding laundry, preparing meals, arranging flowers in a visage act of shared life reminded me that family is not defined by possessions or legal documents, but by the quiet ways we care for and acknowledge one another. During one of these quiet afternoons, she paused while dusting the bookshelves, her hand hovering over a row of novels we had both loved as children. "Do you remember the stories we used to read together?" she asked, a soft curiosity in her voice. I nodded, smiling at the memory. "I remember. You always insisted on reading aloud, even when I wanted to skip ahead." Her eyes softened, a trace of nostalgia in her expression. "I wanted you to be part of it, to share the moment with me. I see now that I should have let you be part of everything, even the hard decisions." I reached out and gently touched her arm. "And now we are. That's what matters. It's never too late to be part of each other's lives." Evenings became moments of reflection and subtle reconnection. After dinner, we would sit quietly in the living room, sharing tea, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking softly about things that mattered. She began to open up more about her own fears, her uncertainties, and even her regrets over how she had handled the inheritance. And I listened, not to judge, not to correct, but to understand, to witness, and to reaffirm the bond we shared. One night, as the rain pattered gently against the windows, I found myself reflecting on how fragile the bond had seemed only days earlier. The conflict had felt insurmountable, the distance between us like an unscalable wall. And yet, here we were, rebuilding the connection slowly but deliberately, one conversation at a time. I realized that reconciliation is not instantaneous. It is an accumulation of small, intentional acts, a quiet persistence that allows trust to return gradually. She began to trust me with more than opinions on small tasks. She shared thoughts and feelings she had kept bottled up, hesitations about the future, concerns about family dynamics, and even her own guilt over past decisions. I responded with patience and empathy, careful to listen fully before speaking, to acknowledge her emotions without trying to solve or control them. This approach allowed us to rebuild the emotional bridge that had been tested, step by step, with honesty and respect. During this period, we also began creating new memories. We experimented with cooking together, trying recipes neither of us had attempted before. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes we failed, but each moment was accompanied by laughter, small triumphs, and the shared satisfaction of collaboration. We took walks in the garden, lingering under the shade of the old trees, talking about nothing and everything. Even the simplest acts, watering plants, tidying the living room, arranging flowers, became gestures of togetherness. Small threads weaving us closer. At times, the past would surface in quiet ways. A fleeting thought of betrayal or misunderstanding would appear, a memory of a harsh word or a closed door. But now, instead of allowing those memories to fester, we addressed them gently. "I didn't realize how much that hurt you," she said one afternoon. "I was only trying to do what I thought was best." "I understand," I replied softly, "and I know you did what you thought was right. That's what matters, now that we understand each other and move forward together." I began to notice that these moments of honesty were transformative. The tiny cracks in our relationship, once sources of tension, became spaces for growth, empathy, and renewed connection. Each conversation, each shared smile, each act of collaboration became a small reclaiming of the trust and closeness we had feared lost forever. Also realized that this process was teaching me something profound about patience and perspective. Love, family, and trust are not static. They are living, breathing things that require continual care. When neglected, they become fragile. but when tended to with intention, they have a remarkable ability to heal and strengthen. I understood that reconciliation is not a single act, it is a series of small, deliberate choices made every day, guided by empathy, humility, and the willingness to remain present. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, she handed me another photograph, one that showed us sitting side by side on a wooden swing, as children, laughing at a shared joke. "I'm glad we can make moments like this again," she said softly. I nodded, holding the photo in my hands. "Me too. These moments remind us why family matters. It's not about the past, or the property, or even the disagreements, it's about being here for each other, every day." From that day on, the atmosphere in our home shifted. It was no longer heavy with unspoken tension. Instead, it was warm, gentle, and alive with the quiet joys of connection. We learned to communicate with care, to listen with patience, and to embrace the imperfect but genuine moments we shared. Even when disagreements arose, they were met with understanding, not defensiveness. We became partners in rebuilding trust, not adversaries in conflict. I realized that the true reconciliation was not just in resolving the issues of inheritance or legal documents, it was in the restoration of our emotional bond. We were learning to see each other fully again, not through the lens of past mistakes or fears, but through the lens of empathy, love, and shared history. And in this process, I found a quiet gratitude growing within me. I was grateful for the opportunity to mend what had been strained, to witness her vulnerability, and to respond with patience and care. I was grateful for the small, seemingly mundane acts that had become profound gestures of reconnection. And I was grateful for the realization that family bonds, though tested, are resilient when nurtured with love and understanding. By the end of that week, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in months. It was not a loud, triumphant feeling, but a calm, enduring serenity. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, moments of tension, and occasions when patience would be required, but I also knew that we had laid the foundation for a renewed relationship, one built on trust, communication, and the willingness to be present for each other in all circumstances. Rebuilding trust had been neither simple nor immediate, but it was transformative. It taught me that love is not only about celebrating joy together, it is also about facing conflict, misunderstanding, and hurt with courage and compassion. It showed me that even after distance and tension, connection can be restored, one quiet, intentional act at a time. And as I looked across the table at my sister, sharing a gentle smile, I realized that we were not just repairing what had been broken, we were creating something stronger, something enduring, something that would carry us forward through whatever life had yet to offer. Forgiveness was not immediate. I discovered that it takes time to release the hurt that lingers after silence and exclusion. I carried my own feelings of disappointment and sadness, and she carried hers: fear, pride, perhaps even guilt. But slowly, through quiet conversations and shared experiences, we began to let go of resentment. One evening, as we sat together in the garden, watching the sun dip behind the trees, I spoke honestly about how I had felt. "I was hurt," I said softly. "I felt left out, forgotten, like everything we built together didn't matter in that moment." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I understand," she whispered. "I didn't realize how much it would affect you. I was scared, and I thought I was protecting us all, but I see now that I only made things worse." I reached over and held her hand. "I forgive you," I said quietly, feeling a weight lift from my chest. "And I hope you can forgive me for any impatience or hurt I may have caused you." Her grip tightened around mine, and she nodded, tears spilling freely. It was not a grand or dramatic gesture, but it was profound, a mutual recognition that our bond mattered more than the mistakes we had made. Forgiveness, I realized, is not a single moment but a process. A quiet commitment to honor the love that exists even when trust has been shaken. In the days that followed, we began to rebuild routines together. We cooked meals side by side, shared tea in the morning, and took walks through the neighborhood, talking about everything and nothing. Every moment of shared life became an opportunity to reinforce our bond, to remind ourselves that we were family first, and that the conflict, while painful, had not broken us. She even started to involve me in planning small gatherings, asking my opinion, and listening with genuine interest. I realized that inclusion, even in minor decisions, was a powerful form of reconciliation. It spoke louder than words. It said, "I trust you, I value you, I want you here." And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension melted away. The absence that had loomed so heavily over us became a distant memory, replaced by understanding, trust, and renewed love. We laughed again, not just politely, but fully. The kind of laughter that echoes in the home and fills the heart. As weeks turned into months, the change between us became more than just surface. It was not a fleeting calm after a storm, nor was it a fragile truce that could be broken by a single word or glance. Instead, it was a quiet, steady transformation, one that grew organically from shared understanding, empathy, and the conscious effort to reconnect. The weight that had once hung over our interactions, the tension, the subtle distance, the unspoken judgments, had begun to dissolve. Our home, once filled with cautious words and careful movements, was now warm and full of small, honest expressions of care. Each day brought reminders of how much healing had occurred. Even ordinary routines became opportunities to deepen our connection. Breakfasts in the morning, once a solitary affair, became shared moments of laughter and conversation. We would sip tea across the table, the steam rising in soft spirals, and discuss plans for the day. Sometimes it was trivial things: what groceries to pick up, whether to water the plants before the sun grew too high, or whose turn it was to take out the trash. But even these mundane details felt significant. They were proof that we were no longer strangers living in the same house. We were sisters, partners, and companions again. Our conversations became richer, more heartfelt. We spoke not only of daily routines, but of thoughts, fears, and reflections that had once been locked away in private corners of our minds. She began to share the burdens she had carried during those weeks of tension, moments of worries about making the wrong decision regarding the will, and the guilt of having unintentionally hurt me. I listened carefully, without interruption, recognizing that part of reconciliation is simply being present. I didn't know how to reach out, she admitted one rainy afternoon, as the drops tapped softly against the window pane. I was afraid that if I tried, I would just make things worse. But now I see, I just needed to be honest. I reached out and placed my hand over hers. We both needed honesty, I said softly, and now we have it. That's what matters. We are here, together, and that is enough. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and in that moment, I felt a depth of connection that went beyond words. It was not merely relief at ending a conflict, it was the profound recognition that even after hurt, even after fear and distance, the bond we shared was unbroken. It had been tested, stretched, and strained, but it had survived. As we moved forward, we also began to create new rituals, small yet meaningful ways to mark our restored closeness. Mornings became a time for shared tea and reflection, afternoons for gentle walks in the garden, and evenings for storytelling or quiet conversation. Even mundane chores, like folding laundry or washing dishes together, became moments of connection, a way to reaffirm that we were present for one another. Each gesture, no matter how small, was a deliberate act of rebuilding trust. One afternoon, as we prepared a meal together, chopping vegetables side by side, she paused and looked at me with quiet sincerity. "I'm grateful," she said softly. "I know I hurt you, but I'm grateful we found our way back." I felt a swell of emotion in my chest. My eyes filled with tears, but I smiled nonetheless. "Me too," I replied. "Every moment we have now is precious. Every conversation, every shared memory, I'll treasure it." It was in these everyday moments that I realized the depth of the lessons we had learned. Reconciliation is not about erasing the past or pretending that hurt did not occur. It is about acknowledging what happened, understanding the feelings involved, and consciously choosing to move forward together. The arguments over the will, the days of silence, the subtle tensions, they had all taught us patience, empathy, and the enduring nature of familial love. Even the will itself, once a source of tension and resentment, became a symbol of growth and understanding. We approached it not as adversaries, but as collaborators, listening to each other's perspectives and considering each other's feelings. We acknowledged the complexities of the decisions to be made, and instead of letting it divide us, we allowed it to become an opportunity to strengthen our bond. Every discussion, every compromise, every small decision reinforced the sense that we were working together, not against each other. Through this process, I began to understand something profoundly simple, yet deeply transformative. Love is not conditional. It does not depend on perfect communication, flawless decisions, or the absence of mistakes. Love endures because it is chosen, maintained through patience, understanding, and a willingness to remain present even when it is difficult. I saw this truth in my sister's eyes as much as in my own reflection. The recognition that family is a living, breathing connection, capable of growing stronger when nurtured with care and empathy. Even mundane activities began to carry a deeper significance. On rainy afternoons, we would sit by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass, sharing stories of our childhood, or speaking of our hopes for the future. I would listen as she spoke of fears she had never admitted before, and she would listen as I shared my own reflections on mistakes, regrets, and dreams. These conversations, soft and deliberate, became the foundation upon which we rebuilt our relationship, stronger and more resilient than before. There were also quiet moments of laughter, moments I had almost forgotten we could still share, the kind of laughter that bubbles up from genuine joy, unrestrained by fear or tension. It would erupt unexpectedly sometimes, over a story about a childhood mishap, other times at the absurdity of an everyday moment. Each laugh was a reminder that our bond had survived the strain, and that joy could once again be part of our shared life. As the months passed, I observed subtle changes in both of us. She began to include me naturally in decisions, seeking input not because she feared disagreement, but because she recognized the value of collaboration. I, in turn, approached our interactions with renewed patience, careful to listen fully and speak kindly. Trust, once strained, was steadily restored, not through grand gestures, but through countless small moments of presence, honesty, and care. One afternoon, as we worked together in the garden, arranging pots and planting flowers, she paused and turned to me. "I never realized," she said softly, "how much these little moments mean. I used to think reconciliation was about words or apologies, but it's really about living together, day by day." I nodded, feeling warmth spread through my chest. "Exactly," I said. "It's about presence, patience, and the quiet consistency of being there for each other. That's what builds trust. That's what strengthens love." Even the way we approached challenges changed. When disagreements arose over household matters, future plans, or family responsibilities, we no longer reacted with tension or defensiveness. Instead, we engaged in gentle, thoughtful conversation, guided by empathy and mutual respect. It was remarkable to see how much calmer, more understanding, and more patient we had become. We had learned that the heart of family is not control or authority, but connection, and that the strength of that connection is tested not in agreement, but in how we navigate differences. That our shared life also became richer through rediscovery. We unearthed old hobbies we had once enjoyed together, reading novels side by side, tending the garden, or baking simple treats in the kitchen. Each activity became a thread weaving us closer, reminding us of the joy of companionship, of shared laughter, and of the enduring bond that had survived even the harshest trials. One quiet evening, as the sky glowed with the soft colors of sunset, she reached for my hand. "I'm glad we have this chance," she whispered. "Even if it came late, it's ours now." I squeezed her hand gently, my heart full. "Late or not, we have it now," I said, "and that's what matters. We are together, and that's enough." Through this period of renewed connection, I realized that the conflicts, misunderstandings, and moments of distance had not been wasted. They had taught us resilience, empathy, and the enduring power of love. The difficulties had forced us to confront our fears, to be honest with ourselves and with each other, and to actively choose trust and care over pride and silence. And in this quiet, everyday life, I discovered something profound. Family is not only about shared blood or legal obligations, it is about presence, care, patience, and the willingness to be vulnerable with one another. It is about creating a space where mistakes can be forgiven, where feelings can be shared, and where love can grow, even after it has been tested. Even now, when I look at her, I see not only my sister, but the person we have become together, stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected. I carry her forward in my thoughts, in my actions, and in the way I approach life. Her presence, once a source of tension, has become a living reminder of the enduring power of patience, empathy, and love. The bond we share, tested and restored, will continue to grow, enriched by the trials we faced and the care we chose to offer one another. Through all of this, I have come to understand that reconciliation is not a single event or a dramatic resolution. It is a continuous practice of presence, kindness, understanding, and shared life. It is a quiet commitment to see one another fully, to honor emotions honestly, and to create moments, small but meaningful, that remind us why connection matters. And in embracing this new beginning, I have learned the most important truth of all: love, when nurtured, endures. It is not fragile, fleeting, or conditional. It adapts, transforms, and thrives. Even when tested by distance, misunderstanding, or unspoken hurt, it finds a way to return, stronger, calmer, and more resilient than ever before. In the weeks and months that followed, I often found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The arguments over the will, the days of silence, the exclusionates, all felt like a heavy chapter that had passed, leaving behind lessons that could never be forgotten. I realized that family, at its core, is not about possessions or ceremonies. It is about presence, understanding, and the willingness to forgive even when hearts have been wounded. I remember one quiet evening, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with soft oranges and pinks. She joined me with a cup of tea, and for a long while, we didn't speak. We just sat there, side by side, letting the warmth of the moment fill the spaces where tension had once lived. That silence was comforting, a testament to the bond we had restored. "Thank you," she said softly after a while, her voice carrying the weight of sincerity, "for everything, for staying, for listening, for loving me even when I didn't see it." I reached out and held her hand. "There's nothing to thank me for," I replied gently. "We are family. Love doesn't disappear just because it's tested." And in that moment, I understood something profound. Life would always bring challenges, misunderstandings, disagreements, and disappointments, but the love we choose to nurture, the patience we practice, and the forgiveness we offer could overcome even the deepest divides. What mattered most was not the fight over a will, or who was right or wrong. What mattered was that we were here, together, choosing to heal, choosing to be present. I also realized that reconciliation is a gift we give ourselves as much as we give it to others. By letting go of resentment and embracing understanding, I felt lighter, freer. I felt the beauty of family, the enduring strength of connection, the quiet power of shared history, the warmth of being known and accepted despite mistakes. From that day forward, we carried each other's presence into every part of our lives. Every conversation, every shared meal, every quiet walk reminded us of what we had almost lost, and how much more meaningful life became when we chose love over pride. The house felt warmer, the days brighter, and even the smallest gestures held significance. And though the memory of that conflict would always linger a shadow of what could have been, I chose to see it as a teacher, not a barrier. It taught me patience, empathy, and the resilience of the human heart. It reminded me that even when relationships are tested, when hurt runs deep, there is always a way back if we are willing to meet it with calm, compassion, and openness. So now, whenever I reflect on that time, I do so with gratitude rather than regret. I am grateful for the lessons, grateful for the patience we learned, and most of all, grateful for the love that endured. Family is never perfect, and life is never without challenges, but love, when nurtured with care, has the power to heal, to unite, and to carry us forward, stronger than before. In the end, it wasn't the will, the argument, or the exclusion that defined our story. It was the quiet choice to forgive, the willingness to reconnect, and the courage to carry one another forward. And that, I realized, is what family truly is: imperfect, tested, but unbreakable in the heart.